Hello, welcome back to our podcast. I'm the Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
We're continuing our series of some of the most disturbing creepypastas, and we're going to be doing one of my favorite ones, and it's the No End House. So, I'll start this story by saying that Peter Terry has a serious drug addiction. We were friends in college, and our friendship had continued after I'd graduated. Peter dropped out after only 2 years. I later moved out of the dorms into a small house near campus, so I hadn't seen Peter as much as before. We would message online here and there, but there were periods of time when he wouldn't be online for a month or more, and it became so often that after a while, it just became normal. After one of these extended absences, I had begun to think that maybe he just no longer cared about maintaining our friendship. Then one night, out of the blue, after about a month and a half of his not being online, I suddenly saw him sign on. Immediately, he sent me a message that read, "David, man, we need to talk." He then began to tell me about the No End House. It had gotten its name due to no one ever reaching its final exit. The rules of the house were pretty straightforward. You just had to reach the final room of the house and you would win $500. Supposedly, there were 9 rooms in all. The house was located just outside the city and only about 4 miles from where I currently lived. Peter said that he had tried and failed, but knowing that he was likely either high or going through withdrawals when he had tried, well, I had a pretty good idea why he might not have been successful. He told me it was too much for anyone to handle and that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I was going to check it out as I could really use the money. He tried to talk me out of it, but I wasn't hearing any of it. But then you got to think, why is he even telling him about it if he doesn't want him to go to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it might be he just need to tell somebody, but
let's hope so.
It's still weird.
Exactly. So, I headed over to the house the next night. As soon as I arrived, I noticed something odd about the structure. It wasn't anything specific, but there was just this feeling of uneasiness that got worse the closer I came to the building. I opened the front door and stepped inside, instantly feeling better. I looked around and found the first room like a hotel lobby that had been decorated for Halloween. There was a desk near the door, and there was like paper ghosts hanging around, fake cobwebs. Didn't see anybody else around, but there was a sign on the wall that read, "Room 1 this way. 8 more follow, reach the end, and you win." I chuckled a little bit at Peter for saying this house was too intense and headed for the entrance to the first room. The first room was incredibly cheesy. The decor looked like it had come straight out of a Halloween aisle of a department store. There were the random papered ghosts hanging around, also witches hanging from the walls, even a few animatronic zombies that were motion activated that would growl at you if you walked in front of them. I quickly saw the exit and I brushed aside some of the fake cobwebs that were near it and made my way towards it. I stepped into the second room. This one was outfitted with a fog machine that was filling the room with a smoky haze. It also had a bat that had been strung from the ceiling that flew in a slow circle. I could hear what sounded like a Halloween soundtrack playing, but I didn't see any source, so I assumed they were pumping the sounds in via some kind of PA system. Feeling more confident, I headed to the exit. Well, this thing don't sound bad at all. I mean, it's kind of almost stupid at this point. I mean, it didn't even sound remotely
It does sound like one of those cheesy,
really cheesy,
scary houses
for almost for children, you know, like just barely nothing. So I reached for the doorknob to enter the next room, but a feeling of dread came over me. For some reason, I did not want to open this door. After a few seconds, I felt stupid. It was obvious this was just another haunted house and there was nothing to be scared of. Room 3 is when things begin to change. At first, it looked just like a normal room. In the center of the room, there was a chair, and in the corner of the room was this little lamp that was doing little to add light to the darkened area. It did, however, allow me to see that there was shadows of several what looked like people in the room. I became terrified. I immediately knew something wasn't right. I tried to open the door from where I just came, but found that it had been locked. That only scared me more. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? Was the door on automatic lock? I didn't know. I looked back into the room again and found that only the chair remained and that the other shadows around the room had disappeared. I slowly began to make my way across the room, and as I reached the halfway point of the room, and I started to feel better. I looked down and noticed that I was not casting a shadow.
Well, that's a bit weird.
This really freaked me out. Yeah,
I imagine it would, yes.
So I ran to the exit. As I closed the door I entered the fourth room. I found myself in total darkness. I'm not really afraid of the dark, but at this moment, I was absolutely terrified. The room was also completely silent. I couldn't even hear the sounds of my own breathing. That is very creepy. I mean, that you can't even make noise.
Yeah.
I began to stumble forward a few steps, my heart pounding in my chest. I blindly felt around, hoping to find a wall, an exit, something, when the silence was suddenly broken by a low hum. Then I could feel something behind me, which caused me to spin around purely on instinct. I couldn't see it, of course, but I knew something was there. The hum grew louder and was closer. It seemed to surround me. I knew whatever was lurking in the darkness was now in front of me. I took a step back, fear the only thing I could feel. I was preparing myself for the worst when suddenly the lights flashed on for a second, and I looked around and saw nothing in the room. The lights went out again, and the hum returned. This time it was a screeching sound. I ran towards where I had seen the door when the light had flashed on and turned the doorknob. Turning back to the room, I fell backwards into room 5. Lying on my back, I got a good look at the ceiling and was surprised at what I found. Trees had grown in the room, towering up and covering the ceiling. I stood up and noticed how big the room was. I couldn't even see the exit from where I was standing.
This sounds a bit
Creepy.
impossible.
It does. That kind of defying physics here, isn't it? I figured the door was likely just behind one of the many bushes and greenery or trees that kind of filled the room. I'd assumed that each room would get progressively more scary. This wasn't really bad at all. I also assumed that the entity from room 4 had stayed behind. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear normal sounds you might hear if you were, strolling through the forest, like the buzz of an insect or the occasional sound of a bird or a small animal in trees. This also began to make me feel uneasy. I could hear the sounds, but I couldn't see anything making them, and I also couldn't see any of the trees moving or anything. I also began to wonder just exactly how big this house even was. From the outside, it looked like a normal house. This was certainly not the case if a single room could essentially house what would be considered a large forest. The canopy of trees covered the ceiling, so I had no idea how high it went. I also was unable to see the walls. The only thing that let me know that I was still inside the house was the flooring, which was a dark wood that matched the floor from all the other rooms. I kept walking along, checking to see if I could see the door as I continued, glancing behind trees and bushes. Then I felt a mosquito land on my arm. I quickly shook it off, and then almost instantly 10 more were in its place, landing on various parts of my body. I could feel them crawling on my arms, my legs. I began to flail wildly, hoping to shoo them away. I looked down and found that even though I could feel them, there was not a single bug to be found.
Creepy.
I know. I could even hear them flying near my face, but there was nothing to be seen. I began to feel them stinging me. I dropped to the ground and began to roll, completely desperate at this point. I began crawling, having no idea where I was. I had no idea where to go. The entrance was no longer in sight, and I still couldn't see the exit. And what seemed like hours, I just crawled along, feeling the bugs crawling on my skin. I'd last spotted an exit. I used a nearby tree to pull myself to my feet, and I was completely exhausted in my long trek. After my long trek through the forest and my constant fighting with the phantom bugs. I was only a few feet away from the door when I heard it, the same low hum from earlier. It was coming from the next room, and it was so deep I could literally feel it reverberating through my bones. I gripped the knob and could no longer feel the bugs on my skin, but I didn't want to continue on. I stood there with my forehead pressed against the door. I knew if I let go of the doorknob, the bugs would return, but the thought of facing whatever stood behind the door didn't seem very appealing. But I also knew I had no choice, so I opened the door and entered room 6. I entered the room and held my eyes tightly shut. The hum was surrounding me again, but as soon as I allowed the door behind me to close, it stopped. I opened my eyes, surprised by the sudden silence. I glanced around the room, my stomach sinking, when I saw that the door behind me was no longer there. The room was identical to room 3, with the same chair and lamp, though this time there were no disembodied shadows. I stood carefully scanning the room. The only real difference I noticed was that there was no door in there, no entrance from where I just came, and no exit. Now, I've never had any issues with mental instability, but as I stood in this strange room with no entrance or exit, I began to understand what it felt like to be insane. I waited in silence. I checked the wall behind me where once the door had been and tried scratching it lightly. The wall was tough and unyielding, but I knew there had to be a door behind it somewhere, so I began to claw wildly at it, as at where I thought the doorknob should be, but found nothing. I slowly sank to my knees, continuing to scratch at the wall. The door was there. I knew it. I just had to get past this wall. "Are you all right?" My heart leapt into my throat, and I spun around, jumping to my feet in one motion. To this day, I regret ever turning around to face the being that had spoken to me. It looked like a little girl. She was dressed in a soft white dress that fell to her ankles. She had long blonde hair and pure white skin with blue eyes. But she was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. And yes, I know that sounds strange. But when I looked at her, I saw something more. I could see that she was just an illusion, and I could also see what really stood before me. It appeared to be a man's body, only much larger than normal and more hairy. He was naked. His head was inhuman, looking like the head of a ram but with the snout of a canine. It wasn't the devil, but it might as well been. It's really hard to describe, as I could still see the little girl. It's as if they were the same form. I don't know how else to say it. I just know that I could see them in both forms at the same time. That's creepy.
That's creepy.
So I stood frozen in horror. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I've never been more scared in my life than I was in that moment. I knew there was no exit. I was trapped in the room with this being. It suddenly spoke again. "David, you should have listened." When it spoke, the voice was that of the little girl, but yet I could hear the voice of the other form in my mind telepathically. The voice in my mind kept repeating the sentence over and over and over, and I definitely agreed with it. I'm actually so at this point, right? I didn't know what to do. I felt as though I were on the verge of madness. I couldn't look away from the entity that stood before me. I felt lightheaded and fell to the floor, but I didn't lose consciousness, almost as if the house wouldn't let me escape in any way. I lay on my side, feeling hopeless. The house was toying with me. I began to glance around and could see that on the floor there was some battery-operated rats scurrying around. For some reason, after I saw them, I felt the fight in me begin to return. I was getting out of here. I was going to get out of this house and never think of it again. This room was hell, and I was not going to become a resident. I lay still and began using only my eyes to search the room for some kind of opening. The room wasn't especially large, so it didn't take me long to do this. The demon's taunting never stopped, the voice getting louder and louder. I pushed up from the floor, leaving myself on all fours, and I turned to the wall behind me, and I began to look at it more carefully. While I had my head turned away, I could feel the demon move to stand behind me, still taunting me, telling me that I shouldn't have come. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to look at it. I looked and found a large rectangle scratched deeply into the wall that hadn't been there before. In the center of the rectangle, there was a small dent, like someone had chipped away a small piece of the wall. As I watched, I saw a number 7 being etched into the wall.
Weird.
It was the entrance to the next room, right where the exit of the last room had been. I don't know how I did it, but I had somehow created the door with my mind. I knew that with every fiber of my being that I had created it. I knew the demon was right behind me, and I also knew that for some reason it couldn't actually touch me. I'm not sure how I knew any of this, but I just did. That's the only way that I can explain it. I placed my hands on either side of the 7 on the door and began to push. I pushed and pushed, putting everything I could muster into it. The demon was now screaming in my ear, telling me now that I was never leaving and telling me that this was the end and I was going to die, that I was going to be trapped in room 6 forever with it. Not going to happen, I thought. Then I screamed at the top of my lungs, continuing to push at the wall. I knew I was going to get through. I just had to stay focused on the end goal. And that was getting the hell out of this nightmare disguised as a haunted house. I clenched my eyes shut, and suddenly I was left in silence. The demon was gone. I opened my eyes and looked around and found the room just as it had been when I first entered, with just the chair and the lamp. I didn't waste any time investigating where the demon had gone. I spun around to the wall and now found a door in its place. I placed my hand on the doorknob, wondering what fresh hell room 7 had in store for me, but then I took a deep breath and turned the knob. I stumbled through the entrance to room 7, feeling both mentally exhausted and physically weak. I heard the door close behind me and then looked around in shock. I was outside. Not outside like in room 5, but actually outside. My eyes began to sting with tears. I fell to my knees. I was finally out. I couldn't have cared less about the money. I stood and looked back at the door I just exited, and it looked like the entrance to the house. I stumbled towards my car as fast as I could. I jumped in and headed towards home. As I pulled in the driveway outside my house, I suddenly began to get an uneasy feeling again. The elation of getting out of the house had faded, and now fear and dread were taking its place. I shook it off, thinking it was likely just a residual of the house. I headed into my house and immediately went upstairs to my bedroom. I found my cat lounging on my bed, and I reached out to pet him, but he hissed at me and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock because he'd never acted that way before, but figured he was just an old cat and likely I'd just startled him. I decided to take a shower, hoping it might help to calm me a bit. But after getting out of the shower and getting dressed, I headed down to the kitchen to grab something to eat. As I was heading downstairs, I casually glanced over towards the living room. What I saw will forever remain burned into my mind. I saw both of my parents lying on the floor, naked, covered in blood. Their bodies were mutilated. Their limbs had been removed and placed near their bodies. Their faces were angled toward me, and their faces were smiling. I vomited and turned from the room. I had no idea how this had happened. They didn't even live with me. I turned back to the scene in the living room, and I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. On the other side of the room, behind the bodies, stood a door. On it, scrawled in blood, was a large 8. I felt my stomach sink. I was still in the house. How could that be possible? I'd driven home. Just then the hum returned. It was louder than ever and seemed to fill the house, shaking the very walls. I began to slowly walk forward towards the bodies and the door. The walls of the house were now shaking so hard that it wouldn't be long before the whole house crumbled to the ground. As I moved closer to the bodies, the eyes followed me, their smiles never changing. I made it to the area that was right between the bodies, the door only a few feet away. Suddenly, the dismembered hands began to claw their way across the carpet towards me. I began to hurry across the room. I glanced back and could see that the hands were closing in quickly. I lunged towards the door and threw it open. I lurched inside and slammed the door behind me. That's it, I thought. Just 2 more rooms. After what I had just saw, there was nothing this house could throw at me I couldn't make it through. I always say never say these types of things.
Because then it always goes
It does
south.
Just feel like you're taunting
every
fate,
time.
but yeah. I felt like there was nothing short of the fires of hell themselves that would keep me from getting out.
Then you're going to face the fires of hell itself.
Probably right. But I had greatly underestimated the power this house possessed. And the things only got even more disturbing and terrifying in room 8. I still have trouble putting into words what I saw in room 8. It was again a copy of rooms 3 and 6, but instead of the normally empty chair that sat in the middle of the room, in this chair there was sat a man. It took me a few seconds to recognize that the man that sat in the chair looked exactly like me. I walked closer, and I had to get a better look. The David in the chair then looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Please," he pleaded. "Please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me." This startled me. "What?" I asked. "I'm not going to hurt you. Who are you?" "Yes, you are," he began to sob. "You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to." He pulled his legs up to his chest and began to rock back and forth in the chair. The man looked so defeated and pathetic, made only worse because he looked just like me. "Listen, who are you?" I asked him again. I wasn't feeling scared, but that would soon change. "Why are you?" I began to ask, but the doppelganger cut me off. "You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me." "Why are you saying this? Look, just calm down, okay? Let's try to figure this out." That's when I saw it. There on the doppelganger's shirt was a small red patch, and embroidered on the patch was the number 9. The man continued to wail, repeating over and over, "You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me." My eye stayed glued to the small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was for. The first few doors had been simple, but then they started getting a little more creative. Door 7 had been etched in the wall by my thoughts. 8 had been marked in my parents' blood right above their dead bodies. But 9, this was what appeared to be an actual living person, a person that looked exactly like me. "David?" I asked the man. He stopped rocking and sobbing long enough to reply, "Yes," before again beginning to sob and rock while repeating that I was going to hurt him. He answered to my name. He was me, right down to the voice. I paced the room for a few minutes while the doppelganger continued rocking and crying. I looked at the room while I walked back and forth. Like room 6, there was no exit to be seen, and the door I'd entered from had now disappeared. I knew that I would not be able to manifest an exit again. I don't know how I knew it, I just knew it. I began to walk around the room, studying the walls and floors. I went back to the chair where the doppelganger sat crying and rocking and started to look around it. I knelt down and looked underneath. A knife had been attached to the underside of the chair with some kind of bracket. Attached to the knife with a red ribbon tied to the handle was a note that read, "To David, from management." That's creepy, isn't it? My mind began to spin. I felt nauseous. The last thing I wanted to do was to remove that knife from under the chair. The other David began to wail uncontrollably. It was too much to process. I was kneeling on the cold wooden floor, yet I was supposed to be sitting in this chair too. And now I was just supposed to kill this supposed me, doppelganger. I didn't know. I couldn't make sense of any of it. My thoughts then turned to Peter, wondering if he had made it this far. I wondered what he had done when he had met a sobbing Peter Terry sitting in the chair. I shook those thoughts away. They didn't matter. It didn't matter what Peter had done or how far he'd gotten. All that mattered was that I was going to get out. With a newfound resolve, I removed the knife from under the chair. Immediately, the doppelganger went silent. "David, what do you think you're going to do?" he asked in my voice. I gritted my teeth, then pushed myself from the ground, keeping the knife clenched tightly in my fist. "I'm going to get out of here." Doppelganger stared at me now, eerily calm, a smug grin on his face. I couldn't tell if he was about to laugh at me or attack me. He rose slowly from the chair until he stood before me, facing me. It was unnerving. Everything about him was exact. It was literally like seeing a mirror image of myself. I gripped the knife tighter, knowing I would soon be forced to put it to use. I quickly tried to come up with some kind of plan, but before I had the opportunity to finish my thoughts, the doppelganger spoke, his voice now much deeper than mine. "Now, I'm going to hurt you," he growled at me. "I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond verbally. Instead, I lunged and tackled him to the ground. I pinned him to the ground and rose above him, knife poised at him to stab. He looked up at me with eyes filled with terror. Suddenly, the hum returned. I could feel it vibrating through my body. The hum slowly got louder until something in me snapped. In one clean motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and began pulling it downward. The room went black, and I was falling. The darkness that I found myself in was different from any that I had ever experienced. It felt as if it was literally engulfing me. After a few moments, I wasn't even sure if I was falling. I just felt weightless. Then a sadness began to creep over me. I felt so lost, so hopeless. An image of my parents' bodies flashed in my mind, which only made the sadness deeper. I was in room 9 for what felt like days, the final room, and that's exactly what it is, the end. No end house has an end, and I've reached it. Sight was completely useless here. And then suddenly it happened. A light appeared. Faint at first, but growing gradually as I watched it with elated joy. I could suddenly feel the ground beneath me again. I gathered my thoughts and my senses and slowly rose from the ground. I stumbled toward the light. Then it seemed to take form as I got closer, and I saw that it was a vertical slit down the side of a door. I opened the door and pulled myself through, and I found myself standing in the lobby area of the no-end house. It was exactly as I remembered it, still decorated in the childish Halloween fare. But after everything that had happened, I was still feeling a little apprehensive that I'd actually made it out. I looked around the room, searching for anything out of place. Then on the desk near the door, I noticed a plain white envelope. I walked over and found that it had my name handwritten across it. Still cautious, it took me a few moments to muster the courage to open the envelope. Inside, I found a handwritten letter that said, "David Williams, congratulations. You have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, Management. Inside the envelope was a smaller envelope. I opened it, and inside I found 5 folded $100 bills. I laughed. In what it felt like hours, I laughed out loud. I felt lighter than air as I exited the house and walked to my car. I drove home, still occasionally breaking into a fit of laughter. I pulled my car into my driveway and got out and started walking towards the house, still giggling to myself from time to time. I opened the door and broke into another laughing fit. It immediately stopped, however, when I turned to close the front door and noticed the number 10 crudely carved into the wood. I just like that story. It's so creepy because,
I never could have guessed that.
well, you know what I'm saying. The no
You mean
end
the
house.
no-end house doesn't have an end?
Right, but I mean, you know what I'm saying. Good God, though, just
Yeah.
how worse it's getting. It does sound like he's almost in hell. I mean, that's like what I would almost think of hell as being like, just something just progressively worse and worse.
Now I
And
kinda,
even making you feel like you're safe sometimes, that would drive you to absolute madness. You
now I
know?
gotta wonder, since there's no end, could he theoretically, like, I'm assuming that that $500 is real. Could he theoretically just go back?
I don't know.
Like, go back through each door? I don't see how he could go back through
I don't think
9.
so, because it sounds like shifting and stuff, because the one
Yeah.
door was leading back into another room, and it was like the door to number 7. Yeah, I don't know. It's just creepy. But I've always liked that story anyway, so I wanted to throw it in.
It's a good story.
Yeah, we'll
I
be
enjoyed it.
continuing on with some more of our creepypastas that we found that we enjoyed. If you have any that you want us to cover, just let us know. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and don't forget to stay disturbed.